Yeah, thank you everybody for coming, and I drew the short straw, so I got the dubious privilege of starting this. First off, I just want to sincerely thank the World Wildlife Fund and all of their and their support in sponsoring this and inviting the three of us to go to this on this really extraordinary experience. It was in every respect informative, fun, interesting. The people that were in attendance were really terrific, and there were representatives from the seaweed industry from really around the Western world. So first off, I just want to say thank you to Bailey and the whole team who put this all together and guided us along this tour. So really, it was remarkable. So thank you. Next slide. And Julie, are you up? Or how are we? You want to do this? Julie, go next, and then
Sure.
Nick. Okay.
Mark, thanks. I'm Julie Decker. If I haven't met you before, so nice to be here today. I think Mark kind of did an overview here. This picture is actually us at Incheon University, having a really nice meeting and reception with some of the higher level people at the university, as well as the seaweed specific professors. Excuse me. And they really recognized that there could be some future connections between universities. In particular, they're interested in reaching out to the University of Alaska and maybe furthering a connection and partnership in the future. So that was a really interesting part of our meetings. Next slide, please. And off to you, Nick.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nick Mangini. I have Kodiak Island Sustainable Seaweeds here in Kodiak. I was very blessed to be on this trip along with all of these attendees. So the attendees were from all over the world pretty much. We had 3 representatives from Alaska. We had Washington represented, Canada, as well as far south as San Diego. The East Coast was well represented by Maine and Connecticut, and then we even had a few people from the UK, Ireland, Scotland. So it was a really good group of people involved in not just the farming part of the industry, but also just all different parts of the industry, investment and processing as well. So great group of people. Next slide.
So this is kind of a rough, just kind of showing the trip that we went on. We landed in Incheon and went to Seoul. The first day was about a 9-hour bus ride from Seoul down to Wando, and that was really it was great. The bus they had was like a I don't know, a tour bus, party bus, really comfortable, and it was great. So we went down, and Wando was kind of our where we started. That was our base of for the tours that we did after that. And most of the seaweed industry, particularly the kelp and abalone industry, is based kind of off of the tip of South Korea, the southern tip of South Korea. Next slide.
So this is just a short itinerary. I won't read everything off, but it gives you an idea of the variety of different places that we saw. And Wando, in that earlier slide, that community is known for being very tourism friendly. There's quite a bit of tourism, and then also just this hub for seaweed and abalone farming. So that was quite interesting to see. Several days of the trip, centered in Wando, and we're going to go through some of these places that are listed on the itinerary and show you actual pictures there. So next slide, Nick.
So we started off with an overview of South Korea's mariculture industry. It has a very long history. Most of it's based around food security on, especially their abalone farms. But they grew, a vast amount of species of kelps, in a number of different ways. You can see on that left side the picture of nori on the top. There's some abalone cages on the bottom, and that picture to the right is just a picture of the waterway right in front of Wando, kind of from our hotel room. So gives you an idea of what the landscape looks like. I wasn't expecting it to be that mountainous and stuff. So kind of a lot like our coastline. And they definitely figured out ways to emphasize its, production in every way. Next slide.
One of the places that we went, as we talked about, was Incheon National University, and went through. They have a really extensive lab complex focused on seaweed production and cultivation, but in particular on strain selection and different ways to create seaweed and kelp production that is making that meets whatever goals they have. I think they've got maybe 28 unique strains that they have developed to do different things in different kinds. Most of them are seaweeds for their nori production, but there are some that are used for their kelp production. One in particular for the big abalone farm is they producing a particular kind that they have different characteristics, whether they're going for food or going for feed. The abalone are fed fresh kelp right out of the farms, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But one of the challenges of feeding them is there's a kind of a window period in August and September, and that talks that where the one particular species doesn't grow as well during that period, so they're trying to get it to grow longer, so they have that feed availability for the full year cycle for the abalone. Next slide.
Again, we touched on this a little bit, but yeah, Incheon University, this is some of the students that were enrolled, and either they're graduate students, either doing masters or PhDs on a variety of issues related to seaweed. I thought it was quite interesting to hear the number of these students that are looking at seaweed and its connection to carbon dioxide removal of some kind in some format. So we heard that message actually frequently in different places from both the university and industry, that they have a big interest in that, either documenting it, understanding it better, and maybe being able to utilize that in their businesses. Next slide, please.
Actually, so the food was really interesting. So this meal was a box meal that was delivered to the meeting. So this is what their box lunches look like, and it was amazing. It was really good.
And you can also see that little sign that we're doing. That's kind of like the Korean heart. So they do that a lot. So it's supposed to represent a heart, and you'll see us in a lot of pictures doing that. Anyways, this is one of our first stops, Marine Biotechnology Research Center. Very interesting place, kind of community-owned processing facility, as well as research based on strain selections. They're very concerned with resiliency to rising sea temperatures around Korea in general, and how to make strains of kelps that can withstand those rising temperatures. They do a lot of research in these places. Another cool part about this stop in particular was that they had community-owned processing facilities that farmers and cooperatives could actually rent from. It was kind of unclear whether it was the actual government or who they were renting it from, but it was basically publicly owned, so they could rent it to process both shellfish and kelps, and they had a freeze dryer that was a fairly large capacity, as well as a whole biorefining area with an evaporation system and an extractor for different elements from the kelps. So it was cool to see the government backing of their industry in every way. And as you'll see in the next few slides, it's really Korea's specialty when they push, they really push all of their products that are coming from their region. Next slide.
And can I add to that a little bit? This was very, very interesting to see that, like Nick said, that they have support for a wide variety of businesses and business sizes. So this facility really was about facilitating smaller size processors, whether it's sort of a stepping stone as you enter into a business and start developing products. And then once you have your products and markets, then you can, scale up. So we saw a wide variety of business sizes, which was really, really interesting and good to see because, as you'll see in some of the other pictures, the scale of the industry is giant, compared to what we have in Alaska, but it still facilitated lots and lots of small businesses and then medium size and large. So I thought that was a really interesting takeaway, and that this community processing facility had like a whole shellfish section for making soups or frozen, shellfish, all kinds of different things. And then the seaweed section. And they were in the middle of building out another piece that was going to hold $3 million of new equipment for processing seaweed into things that can be used for cosmetics.
Yeah, it was really interesting because you could rent it for a day, a week, and you could do food grade retail packaging, and there was a company in there doing it just in running, and they may only run 1,000 or 5,000 units, and then somebody else comes in, and the rates were clearly subsidized because the rates that they were described to us were super reasonable, and it was. And what was really interesting, and we'll talk about this more, was the industry is, there's all sizes of companies, and even the farming is primarily made up. You've got these huge swaths of farm that are made up of individual farms, right? I mean, it's not one big company. It's, you may have 40 farmers in one area that lease a particular part of this. It really, really cool concepts. I've been doing it for, hundreds of years. So it was neat. Anyway, next slide. So this in the next slide, I think it's my turn. Is it my turn? Anyway, this in the next slide are just one, they have this whole rooms, and we found this in every community, in every office, including like the Wando mayors, the city hall. There are places in every community where they just have the products that are produced in the community displayed for everyone. And they're really proud of all of the products, and you go through there and there are hundreds of products. Some are big, some are small. And this is one of the rooms in this particular facility. So go to the next slide, and you can see, there are dozens of different products, and most of these are probably, really, as I could tell, small scale, where they just went through, but they feature them. Now, the one on the left was, I might have taken that photo, but it is it's an abalone drink, which was actually really good. It's some kind of, I don't know what's made of, but it had a little peanutty flavor to it. And it was, we were a little dubious probably when we opened it, and then we drank it and we're like, man, this is great.
Delicious. It was delicious.
Yeah. We kind of had it was at every stop. It was like a bottle of water, the abalone juice, and then these little candies.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
And also to add to that, you can see on the bottle, they were just small, maybe like 6-ounce bottles, but there you see the eye and the heart. They were marketing that this abalone had certain kind of nutrients that were supposed to be really good for eyesight. And so they called that out, to us verbally, but it's also on the packaging. It was interesting.
Yeah, and the next slide is another photo of kind of the same. This is a different display. I think this was at Wando Tower, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, but everywhere we went, there were displays of local products that were produced in the community, and it was really neat. And and they weren't for sale. They were here to demonstrate, what they did and how proud they were of all of the products that came out of that community.
Yeah, I just can't stress enough how extremely proud they were of all of their products, and they didn't miss a single opportunity to display them. Like whether you were walking in City Hall, it was the first thing you saw. When you walked into Wando Tower, there was a room you had to walk through full of their products, and they just really didn't miss an opportunity to showcase the abilities of their region.
And just like to explain, Wando Tower was this big tower, the tallest point, in Wando anywhere around. So you could visually see all the farms around the area. And it was up on a hill, beautiful gardening, but it's heavily touristed area, right? So lots of visitors. Any visitor that comes to Wando goes there. And this is where they're displaying all their really cool products. So it was an interesting, again, kind of combination of tourism connected to the industry, which I thought was cool.
But you couldn't buy the products there. You had to go find them somewhere else. They were just there to look at. Yeah, which was really cool.
Yeah, and they had everything from, dried products to pastas to Ficoidin, like health supplements, beauty products, pretty much anything you could think of. They had figured something out.
Yeah, really.
Next slide, please.
Sure.
I'll start this, but I think Nick and Mark actually was on the vessel that got more time at the abalone farm. But as Mark had mentioned earlier, in Wando, there's a bay that has, I don't know, hundreds of abalone farms. And that is sort of the near shore part. And then rimming on outside of that is all seaweed farms. And they basically harvest the seaweed, bring it right over to the abalone farm and dump it in. And they rotate through the farms, I believe on a weekly basis is when they're feeding the abalone. So you guys want to add anything more to that?
You could see this machine that's right in the center of the picture is actually a grader for abalone. So the abalone are pulled from the nets and dumped on deck of the boat, which is basically full of the stipes of the Saccharina japonica, I guess. The abalone eat the entire leaf, but they don't eat the stipes. So there's a team that separates the abalone from the feed that they're feeding. And one interesting fact is that they feed 70% of their brown algae or saccharines to the abalone. Only 30% of their brown kelp is going into foods for human. It's mostly grown to feed their abalone. So somebody has like a vibrating, I don't know, it's like a razor thing that they knock the barnacles and clean up the abalone shells that are then passed to another team that puts them on this grater, and that grater weighs them and spits them out into different baskets on the side. And then they separate the ones that are ready for market here in front, put a lid on it and throw it back into the cage until they're done for the day. So basically they're just sorting all of these abalone, and then I would imagine putting them into different cages.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting process. And they had, quite a few workers. There's probably 10 or 12 people working on it. It was very interesting.
Yeah, and that part was really cool and interesting. And then when we got back to the city, we noticed that there were these lines of refrigerated seawater trucks that they would come and they would be offloaded in off the boats every day. And these trucks would go and take these and distribute them to stores and vendors and stands and things all over the country every day. And there were at least a dozen of these trucks at the waterfront. And so they have this whole integrated system. They're producing these for about 18 months between seed and when they're produced. And I actually, this one of my biggest takeaways from this whole trip was whether or not this kind of concept of growing abalone, really simple process, not a lot of mechanical tools, would be, I think it'd be something that we should explore in Alaska, because I think it might be a really good opportunity to get to create real value growing things that already grow in Alaskan waters. Next slide.
I think that's to you, Nick.
Okay, this is just more pictures of the abalone farm visit. So these cages in the front, you can see they got a net rim like around the rim of them, and then they have like a little tether for them to grab with their crane. You could see the boat in the background. There's a team of people separating the abalone, like I explained, from the kelp stipes, and then there's another vessel on the backside of that that has the sorter on board. Um, it was actually a pretty simple process. I would same as what Mark just said. I was very impressed with the simplicity of the design, the simplicity of you know, the grow out and how they do it. They had a lot of workers. It seemed like they were a lot of foreign workers, especially in this sense. There was a lot of Chinese and Filipino workers on the boat. Um, and I think the Koreans mostly own the farms. So that was another interesting takeaway for me. But I think this is a really, great food security, way path forward for Alaska, because I had never eaten as much abalone as when we were in Korea. We had it with every. They get you up at 7 in the morning and ask if you want spicy clam soup or seafood. I was like, well, I'm gonna go for clam soup in the morning. I've never done that, so
And they're pretty proud
yeah,
whenever you see a giant abalone statue outside the ferry terminal, that's quite an interesting sight.
yeah. I think the next slide might be also of just a picture of the abalone farms as well. And this is Laura. She works for Builders Initiative that helped fund this trip too through World Wildlife Fund. So thank you to her. But you can kind of just get an idea of the scale and of what they have going on there.
Yeah, it went on for miles, literally miles. And the one we toured was a medium-sized farm. That's the way it was described to us.
And you can see like these black structures, right? That's the abalone part. But if you look beyond, there's a whole bunch of buoys and you can just kind of see dots. That's the seaweed farms beyond that. So yeah, it was significant size.
Yeah, pretty interesting.
Next slide. Mark?
Yeah, so when we went to the seaweed farm, so in this particular region, they do two things. They're growing kelps primarily for feed for the abalone, and then they grow a number of different seaweeds like Gracilaria in it. And this is a look down from I think Wando Tower. The photograph is. And you could see all of the dark areas there. Those are abalone. Abalone outside of that is all the seaweed farming. And so this is where we went, and so you can kind of get an appreciation for how much is done. And that probably represents 50 or 100 different farming companies or groups that are cultivating different parts of each one. And they have their own markets, and they buy their seed from different nurseries. They don't have one nursery. They can go out and nursery and select the best seed from the nursery that they want. And and it's really a kind of an open market, but it's very much a cooperative structure in the way we've got it. So you've got to lease it from your area from the cooperative, and that was really interesting, the way that was structured.
One more.
Next.
Can we go back to that one really quick? Sorry.
Okay.
Well, I thought this was really interesting. So this is Wando Tower. It was at a really high point. This little structure down here on the bottom left-hand side of the picture there, it was actually a way of them sending signals along the coast. So they had these along different points along the coast and would
Smoke signals.
different smoke signals. And I thought that was really interesting. So
yeah, it was a historic site.
I thought it was pretty cool.
Communication before the internet.
No, yeah.
So this is, well, on the left is Nick on the boat with some kelp, but on the right is the nori farm. So everything about nori is different. Everything, the production of the seed is different, the farming is different, the processing is different. So that was really interesting because no one is doing nori in Alaska. So that was quite interesting for us to see. And you guys correct me if I get this wrong, but the two white like buoys or floats at the top there are positioned like that because they flip it over and then it holds the nori out of the water, and so it can kind of dry to, like, my understanding is for biofouling. So it dries for a little bit and then they flip it back over and it rehydrates the seaweed and it continues to grow. So that was interesting to see. I think we have some more pictures with it out of the water. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Oh, and Nick is eating, I believe that's Saccharina japonica.
Nick?
So these are just some different types of the seaweed that we saw in South Korea. So we were only on the boat for maybe 5 hours total, and we spent probably an hour of that at the abalone farm, honestly, and another hour getting line out of the wheel. But we got to see a lot of different stuff in a very, very close proximity. So these are some different things. It's very close to what we grow here in Alaska and different at the same time. I guess it has a lot of the same look, but it's obviously the same family, but different species. There's some things that I don't remember the name of because I'm not familiar with them, like the bottom middle. The gracilaria on the right was interesting, to say the least. We tasted all of them and looked at all of them. They were all grown in very, very similar structures, except for the nori. That was the specialty. So yeah, it was very interesting. Similar, similarly structured throughout all the different farms, and they just use the boat with the crane to lift lines out of the water, and everything's slack enough to lift it up, and somehow they don't get it all tangled up. So that was pretty impressive too.
Yeah.
And so this slide shows 4 different species. I think we saw in total 6 different species, but it's interesting to know, it says on the slide, even though they grow, a variety of different species, 90% of their production is just 3 species, nori, Saccharina japonica, and the undaria. So that point was made to us multiple times.
Yeah.
Next slide.
And what's interesting, I thought about the grow out structures. I mean, it's really the same thing that the Alaskan industry in the main, and the same kind of lines and grow lines. Very simple. It's not complicated. Really, they make it look easy, but it's clearly not. And they focus so much of their energy and money and time on research to develop strains and really effective nurseries to produce consistent supplies for everybody. Which is, for this massive grow out, so those, and then they spent the other part, they really focused on a variety of product development and branding and labeling and doing really interesting things with the same raw material. And the grow out part was really a function of getting from A to B. It was really simple and low cost, both in the equipment that they used, and I think that's important for us to recognize that, that's, those are the things that, that's another takeaway, is those are the things that we as an industry and as individual participants ought to be looking at, is really good seed and really good products.
And I will say, I saw a couple of questions in the side there. The abalone farm, you can see, was more of a sheltered bay. The seaweed, it was outside of that, but there was still like islands around. So it's still a relatively protected area. It was definitely not open ocean, and not deep. And so they have like no more sort of open access to farm leases. Now they're just sort of being turned over to different people as people get older, whether they're passed down to family members or sold. They are interested in potentially learning how to grow in offshore exposed deep water, but that's not occurring right now. And then, so I'll mention on this slide, there were thousands of seaweed farm licenses. So over 2,000, and over 90,000 hectares, which is, over 180,000 acres. So substantial size. In addition, there was another 1,200 farm licenses that were for multiple species. So I think that's for shellfish and seaweed. And then the total employment numbers we had for 2020 was, over 14,000 employees. And as Nick mentioned, it was quite interesting to hear that they are also having challenges sort of getting new young people recruited, Koreans, to work in like on the actual farm. And they're actually importing labor for some of those farm jobs, which we find in Alaska some similarities to that. So that was quite interesting. Anything additional, you guys, on that? Next
I
slide.
guess I will just say there was some discrepancies in the math. We
Yes.
had a real hard time getting hard numbers of anything and trying to not only translate, but do the math for differences from pounds and kilos and all of that. It seemed there was just a lot of loss in translation. So I feel bad because I've tried to answer a lot of questions, but it wasn't really our own fault. We didn't. We needed like a math translator as well or something. Very
Yeah,
confusing. But this
translations
slide,
were,
yeah, this slide kind of just gives you an idea of the scale of what they're doing things. They have shipping lanes that go through these farms, but as you can see in both of these slides, they just have miles and miles and miles of corks, buoys, farms, and they depend on it. That's the impressive part. It's not, a lot of it's not export. It's, other than
was
the, it's being used for food security for their own, country. So I thought that was something, a big takeaway for me. As
it,
how much they utilize what they grow as well.
yeah, and I think it's kind of it's such an ingrained part of every community that they do it in. It's part of it's very much part of who they are. And I think about, it's similar to, say, communities like Kodiak and others, where fishing is kind of like identity of the community, and that's what it is. Very much here. Wando is it's an aquatic farming community, and everything is derived from the sea that drives all of that, and it's part of their it's very much part of the fiber of who they are, and I thought that was really interesting.
And just one more thing to note, like there's obviously a lot of differences between South Korea and Alaska. There's some similarities as well, but one of the differences is, in Alaska, by state law, aquatic farms can only take up to 30% of any particular bay. And so, we would never see something like this picture on the left. But we also have a giant coastline compared to South Korea. It's so much bigger. So, we could see scale in a very different way, much more spread out potentially.
Yeah.
So just keep in mind, like, this doesn't all translate to Alaska.
Yeah, I mean, we have, I think, I mean, we did the math at one point, relative scale, and Alaska is, dozens times larger than all of Korea. And, so and the coastline is, it's more like the coastline of, they say, just a series of islands, and Alaska, much less the balance of it. So a really different scale.
Next slide. I think we got about 10 more slides to go, so we should probably roll through them a little faster. Nick, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So I took this picture. I don't remember where. I might have even found it online and screenshot it. I can't remember. But the vessel on the left is just a general, this is what every kelp farmer has. This is what they all use. It's got a landing craft style bow. I would assume that's for harvest. We've had a lot of similar problems trying to bring it up over an angle, and with loss of kelp or just the hold fast sliding down the lines. They all have this crane with a grabber, which is super convenient. It telescopes out. It looks really, really handy, and I wish I had 10 of them. And just fairly simple fiberglass boat with a 3-sided structure to drive in, and driven by Honda outboards. There's not like a bunch of super technology that we don't have available to us here in the US. I just think that we haven't built kelp specific vessels here. And the one on the right was I'm assuming a tender. I saw one of these just picking up kelp off of another boat, like on the left while we were on our farm tour and filling this big hold. So I don't know if that's to move kelp from like a large scale grow out to abalone farms, or if that's where like food grade stuff goes. Didn't really get a chance to get any of that, but just an idea. I mean, that's probably like a 60-foot boat with just an open hold with no lids. So we have lots of that kind of stuff, here in the
Yeah.
United States that could be utilized.
One of the, one of the things I think it was really interesting about it is like all of these boats are the same. All of the equipment's the same. They're interchangeable. They're all probably all made in the same mold in the same facility, which drives down cost per unit and all of the things that are necessary for, really efficient and parts. Everybody has the same crane, so the same parts, and everybody knows how to fix it. And they're all outboard powered, which I thought was, there were a couple of pair of Honda 250s on all of these boats, and it's the same one for all of them. So, a lot of, really interesting ways that they made it very efficient and effective. And they use these same boats for the abalone harvesting that they used for the seaweed cultivation and harvesting. It was just really well thought out and refined in a very simple and repeatable way.
Yeah, and on that note, I know we're in a little bit of a hurry, but I really do want to say I think that's an important takeaway, what he just said, regionally especially. Instead of everybody out trying to do their own farm designs and figure out things, the more uniform you get everything, the more that you guys can all share in equipment and farm style and learn the ways from, how to do things together. So maybe not statewide even, but regionally, it's a really big suggestion of mine is work with the other farmers, because you can tell that these guys, although they compete, they work together a lot too. And if something breaks, the next farmer could come over and help them harvest because it's the same exact style as they farm. So
Yeah, it translates into efficiencies.
Yeah.
I think we're a little behind on our schedule here. We're
you can blow through this one.
Yeah, that's one. That's a fish.
This is for comedy.
It's a little fishy.
Seaweed processing plants, I'll take this one to start with. We saw multiple ones, everything from the smaller scale, like we talked community owned facility, to medium-sized companies to large companies. And this was an example of a medium-sized company that was making these nori sheets, sort of like a sushi roll sheet that you might buy in the store. And some of them were being processed into the smaller little snack size version.
And it's really good fresh.
Yeah, it was excellent. So you can see those sheets are rolling through. It's all automated equipment. And really this nori processing was probably the most sophisticated processing equipment that we saw. Well, not the only one, I guess. Some of the drying and bio manufacturing kind of stuff was quite sophisticated as well. But it was really interesting. They have it really down to a science.
Yeah, and this machine on the left, they make a really small version of that, which is just flavoring the sheets that's in all these markets. And I think that a lot of people just buy big bulk sheets of nori from different processors, and then they have their own flavoring that they're adding. Because I noticed different people were going different places, and there was ladies sitting there flavoring smaller sheets of nori and selling it in the open markets. And the last thing I'd like to say is that this factory, all of their equipment was AA machinery, which stood for always awesome, which I loved.
Next slide, please. Mark, do you want to take that?
Oh yeah, so the largest processor we saw, which is called Daesang, and we toured their huge facility. They do massive amounts of nori and different things, and I was not entirely clear based on the numbers that we got, but that company's revenue is probably nearest as close to $1 billion, or maybe multiple billions in dollars globally. They have, dozens of different products, primarily seaweed based, and, really, really interesting. And they are, we invited them to Alaska, very interested in collaborating with the Alaskan industry to primarily because I think they have reached the limit of what they can reasonably produce, and if they want to do more, they're going to have to find other sources for their for material. And we'll see where that goes, but certainly interesting. Next slide.
So we also visited a kelp noodle making plant, and you can see those noodles there on top. It was basically in the back of a very small warehouse. I was very surprised at the scale, what they were doing out of a very small area. But again, Koreans don't miss an opportunity to, utilize every, space available, or every sense of, option for power, anything. And the bottom picture is at Daesong. This guy was testing for a number of different things, doing some light testing and all the way down to radioactivity tracing that, they do real high on the quality control there.
Mhm.
And different kinds and qualities. They buy them all at auction, and different qualities get different prices based on, when they come in fresh, and everything is purchased on that kind of on that basis. And there's the QC, and different products, different quality will go into different products. So it's not just one size meets all. Every different grade has a specific path into the marketplace.
Next slide. This was another processing facility. They were taking, I think in an earlier picture, you could see long dried blades of kelp, and they're cutting them in these little squares and packaging them. I think they're for adding to soups and things like that. So the crazy picture on the right.
Anything outside of spec there, that lady that's forward on the belt was adding to that box, and that's what that powder. There was a slide of powder on somebody's hand, or they had this powder, this basically pulverizing hammer mill type thing in the back group of this that they turned into a powder for ingredients as well.
Next slide.
I guess I'll do this. They took us to a marine supply store where they stocked all kinds of equipment that were used by the various industries, very reasonably priced. I brought home a grappling hook in my baggage because it was a stainless steel grappling hook for $50 or something like that. It was really cool. But this machine on the left is a seeding machine for taking seed string and applying it to line, and they're just available off the rack. You can go down and buy one, and they're super simple electric machine that is used to wrap seed line around a grow line, and I suspect that every marine supply store in the area had them in stock. You just buy them on the floor for, I don't know, $500 or $600. That kind of thing. So really, really interesting. And like I said, everything is built around how to support this industry.
So toward the end of the trip, we went to the National Assembly of Korea and had sort of a joint forum with the Korean Phycology Association. I might not have that name correct, but basically it's like, all of the people really interested in the research around seaweed. And so it was really wonderful. This is a beautiful building near the assembly building chambers. But it was a very interesting joint conversation with researchers, industry, and government officials, and then us as sort of a dialogue across all the different participants, and sort of seeing what trends are, what people's interests are, and researching and developing relationships in the future.
Yeah, it was really interesting.
Oh, I got the key takeaway slide.
You go, Rockstar.
I mean, there was thousands of takeaways. I could spend the whole hour talking about what I learned, and things that I even think that we're even a little bit more ahead of them on in some ways. Like some of the farm designs that we have are a little bit more sophisticated, but like I said earlier, I don't think they can go back and start over with like the vast amount of farms they have there, and it works for their regions, and it works well. So, man, they just didn't miss an opportunity to showcase all of their stuff, all of know, and their government really supports their industry. They put a lot into the research behind what the strains are and how to grow things, and you know, like I saw in the chat, low flow situations to increase their harvest and biomass. You know, they're all in on the kelp and seaweed game. So I guess that was my biggest takeaway.
I think my biggest takeaway from this was it was the abalone and kelp farm operating symbiotically and really producing a high value protein for sale. It was really cool, and I think that's something that that the Alaskan industry or research ought to look into and see if we can make it work in Alaska.
My biggest takeaway is that the Koreans kicked our butt in karaoke.
No doubt about that.
Hands down. But
Yeah.
so we should go to questions and answers.
But before we do, if you ever do go to Korea, do not go to a baseball game, even if it's just for 2 innings. It was like the most amazing experience. And this is us in front of the stadium. We went for like 2 innings. You're not allowed to sit on the side of the stadium of the team you're not rooting for. They have dances and songs for every player. It was really a pretty cool like just something you wouldn't think you would do. And I really encourage you to go check it out if you go there.
Amen to that. And it was, really, it was and it was just something we just kind of happened on. Actually, because of Nick, one of Nick's friends from Sitka just happens to live over there, and he gave us spent a day touring with us, and it was amazing. He showed us all of all of these cool things that we wouldn't even have seen without him. So thank you, Nick. Hey, and one other thing I just want to do is I want to do a shout out to Mara Scudero, who put this whole PowerPoint together last night, and she is she did a great job, and thank you, Mara.
All right, well, thanks, guys. So we have a couple of questions in the chat box, and I'm going to go ahead and read through those. If you have a question that you want to ask out loud, you can raise your hand. You do that by going down to this little reaction tab, and there's a raise hand button, and that should pop you up so I could see you. Otherwise, it's kind of difficult to see who all has their hands raised or wants to ask a question. You're also welcome. We'll have a little bit of a pause, quiet period, just to unmute yourself and ask it out loud. So I'm going to go ahead and read through the questions in the chat box, and then I will ask for verbal questions. So let's see. Our first question is kelp grown outside in exposed open waters? And I think that was pretty well answered. Anything to add on top of what was already said?
I mean, you couldn't really see that far because of both pollution, and there was a lot of fires in the region. On our way down, we drove by a couple wildfires, so it was really hard to tell how protected we were other than looking at a map. But it definitely wasn't like way out in the Gulf of Alaska or anything like that, no.
And just to add on to that, the next question is, how big does the weather get where the abalone farms are located?
They said they had typhoons in the region, but they didn't really go over seasides, I didn't think.
No, they're very concerned about climate change and the potential for increased typhoons. They mentioned that, and they said, as you can see, if we had a big one come through this area, we'd be completely wiped out. So that's one of the issues driving their concern.
I would say that, by looking at the structures, the way those abalone farms were built, 100-knot storm like we get every week in Alaska would probably tear them apart. They were, so that leads me to believe that they don't get, really big ocean wind and swell and waves in there.
No.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. Are South Korea's seaweed and abalone mainly supplied to the domestic market or the international market?
I think it's a variety. Seaweed's definitely being exported by, some of the larger processors. The abalone is, I don't know that I got a clear answer on that, because we did kind of talk about this a little bit, because it came up in that they were saying that they've kind of maxed out the abalone market. And I thought, well, if you have, like, what about China? What about, exporting? And so the conversation was a little fuzzy there, because we were going back and forth through translators. But I feel like abalone was more domestic than export, and the seaweed was sort of a variety.
That was my take too. Then somewhere in my mind, I heard, or I think I remember somebody asked a question. They said probably maybe 25% of the abalone is exported, but the majority is consumed in the country. And seaweed, I think the nori and things like that, the seaweed snacks and nori is, there's a large export market for that. Very, very large. And I don't know what percentage it is, but it's certainly material.
All right, the next question, I may need some help with it. It starts with an acronym, KOICA. Says, are one of the sponsors of Tanzania seaweed farming. Tanzania or Africa giants in seaweed farming. What do you think makes the industry vibrant?
In Korea?
Oscar, you may need to give us some clarification there. Please feel free to unmute yourself if you can.
Yeah, sure. COICA is more like the United States, USA, sort of like their governmental, support, international support. So I noticed something about Tanzania, and they have this organization that has the private players, the government, and academia all put together to make the industry grow. And that was quite interesting. So does Korea have the same? Is it something that if borrowed could help different countries enhance their trade? My name is Oscar. I'm from Kenya. Thank you.
So I think what you're saying is, like, in Tanzania, you see like sort of everybody pulling together to make the industry really strong, vibrant. And I would say, yes, we saw something similar to that in South Korea. There was local municipal government that was involved. There was national government that was involved. In fact, when we were there, the representative, like sort of for their Congress or their Korean National Assembly from the Wando region was flying to Japan, or did fly to Japan when he was supposed to be meeting with us at the Korean National Assembly, because Japan is looking at releasing some of their nuclear waste, right, from their big accident that happened. And the Koreans didn't want to see that happen because they're concerned about it negatively impacting their aquaculture companies and industry. So they definitely had the ear of their government on multiple levels. And then it was really baked into the community, because you saw all these things in the community sort of celebrating it, like the statues and the products at the tourist sites and things like that. So it was really celebrated just within the community and connected to the government and industry connected.
Looks like Oscar has a follow-up question, so I'll go ahead and jump to that. Says, is kelp farming all offshore? Deep seaweed farming, or deep seaweed farming? It's all near shore in East Africa.
Near shore and very shallow in Korea.
Yeah. Yep. Minutes from the harbor kind of beginnings.
All right. One of the next questions is they're wondering about marine mammal entanglements in the aquatic farming gear. Was there any conversation around that?
Well, I could say that we didn't even see any. So that was like one takeaway. As a matter of fact, I was like, does anybody knows what's missing? I'm like, seagulls. There's like no seagulls anywhere. And then way as far as we got offshore, like a mile and a half, all of a sudden 3 seagulls flew by, and we were like, oh, birds. And the guys were looking at us like, what are you guys? That was funny.
Yeah.
At least that was what happened in our boat. So
Yeah.
I don't think there is a lot of marine mammals in there personally, but could be
Less
wrong.
wildlife than Alaska.
Yeah.
Very, very few birds on land too. I mean, we talked about that several times, about how we just didn't see a lot of wildlife no matter where we were. But also another part is that almost every piece of land in South Korea is developed in some way. Unless it was a rock, or a cliff or something like that, something was done with almost everything we saw in all of the transit. So really dense development. It could be just, a small farm or something like that, but almost every piece that we saw, or at least I saw, was developed in some way that on the land.
All right, the next one is, there's several questions, so I'm going to read it in its entirety. That way you can provide a little bit more of a holistic answer. It would be interesting to know how big revenues, tons of volume, etc., the kelp and abalone industry is in Korea, and how it compares to other Korean industries, autos, computers, chips, etc. Kelp receives huge government support. Is this industry relatively small or big? And then, does the government support the other industries as much? We have to wonder what it would take for our government, federal and state, to support this industry and partners, and perhaps reduce bureaucratic obstacles.
So I'll just take a stab at that. We really didn't talk about any other industries, so I don't think we can compare. For sure, at least regionally, there was, huge emphasis regionally in that southern region on the aquaculture industry. When we were in big cities, we saw lots of other industries. So I think regionally it's a primary industry, but not necessarily countrywide.
That is our last question in the chat box. I don't see any hands raised. Would anyone like to unmute yourselves and ask a question out loud? Yeah, Oscar, go ahead and ask another question.
Well, I'm
Thank you.
Kodiak Sharma from India, at present in US to visit my grandchildren. It's really very, very good to hear from Asian country, South Korea, where I have been to a farm, and we are India, the government of India is proposing with MISTI a scheme to have similar kind of activity all around our 7,000 plus mile coastal area, where we are going to have seaweed, we are going to have lots of salicornia growing, and one more thing, one of the millets, which you don't call it millet, is quinoa. Quinoa is growing there very well. It is a bio-saline farming. So though I have come on a personal visit, I'm very happy to know that good things are happening in US. Day before yesterday, I was in northeast and went to Maine and saw some sea farms. It's really amusing and interesting. In India, we have very small activity. In India, you can see a lot of potential because there the hands are many. As you know, we are the largest population country in the world. And we have people who are unemployed, especially the indigenous people living in the coastal region. Mm. So that is going to be a big opportunity for anybody thinking to come to India. My name is there, my number is there. Kodiak Sharma is my mail ID, Gmail. Anybody can get in touch with me. Thank you. It was really good learning for me. All the best, especially the dance part and the baseball thing really impresses me. We play cricket in India. You might have heard about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ron, please feel free to ask your question.
Yeah, so I'm actually, earlier on in the presentation, you were talking about the processing facilities. And I'm actually curious how much it would legitimately cost to begin producing one of those, and how, I'll say, near to the growing areas they need to be.
That's a good question. Sorry, I'm going to take a stab at it first. It depends. They had a number of ways. We didn't get to see any of their drying capacity outside of big fields covered in basically tarpaulins that they laid it out in, which we wouldn't have that ability in Kodiak, at least, because it's been raining for 2 months, literally. And so, outside of building greenhouses and things like that, they air dry a lot of their stuff. So human food, I think that's going to be tough to do in the United States with FDA rules and things like that. I'm sure that there's some other ways that they're drying things that we didn't get to see just because I don't think it was their food grade harvest. As far as proximity, I think there's a number of different options. Markos is traveling quite a ways with his kelp to primary process, so it's doable within probably a day's time, I would imagine. Outside of that, I think we're going to have to get creative. As far as costs of building those facilities, I think Mark might have a little bit better idea than I do.
I guess I had two things. One is, transportation to the processor. Anytime that you can keep that distance as short as possible economically, it makes more sense. We go to Ketchikan because we don't have any other options at the moment, but hopefully that'll change, and we can go directly to an island side processor, because it doesn't add anything except cost and age to the product. So there's no upside to going long distance. It's only downside. So the more we can do it locally, the better off the industry is going to be. The better prospect for being able to do more and make some get some margin in some of those things that we're doing. As far as building processing facilities, really depends on what you're doing with the product. It's got to be, I think the industry is going to grow based on, what the market dictates, and then build efficient processing that meets what the market has. We can go and, it's got to be product based, and that drives and every process is going to be different based on what that market demand is, whether it's, I think functionally drying is the first thing to open up a scaled market. We get that established, that's one thing. But if we want to do other things and biorefining and different things like that, we're going to have to go, that's going to be based on the market that provides a value that makes that investment and make sense over time.
Just to add a little bit, there's a couple of documents that I put links in the chat box to. They're on the AFDF website. There's some analysis that we've contracted McKinley Research Group to look at for sort of processing hubs, and it kind of deals with some of the challenges and logistics around centering processing near farms, so that processor can get enough product also to make the plant numbers work, right? So there's a lot of different things to think about, and generally I think a rule of thumb that Nick mentioned is, on a slow boat, sort of like a tender or some other kind of vessel, if you can get to the processing facility within 24 hours, you probably can service 24-hour run around a centralized processing facility.
All right, I'm going to go to a chat box question, and then we'll go to you, Oscar. Having seen the state of mariculture in Wando, what adjustments would you suggest for Alaska?
The research around developing strains that are resilient to different, things Mother Nature is going to throw at you would be one. One that I thought was a key takeaway. They spend a lot of time in the lab setting. I'm not talking about in the ocean, seeing like what these things do for like 5 years before they ever put it in the water. And I want to stress, I think that's very important too. We don't want to just throw anything in the ocean and have it take off.
Yeah.
They do a ton of research surrounding strain selection and, resiliency to different factors of the climate.
And their research facilities are well funded. They're well staffed with lots of scientists of different age and experience, and graduate students and professors, and their phycology process is really advanced. And I think that's a really important part, is spending the appropriate amount of time and resources in research and understanding everything we can. And I think there's a lot of what they've done in research. We don't have to recreate a lot of that. They are willing, at least they expressed to us, a really strong willingness to collaborate and cooperate. on, on what they've done and what they're, and what goes on in the future. So I think, taking the initiative to reach out and make those connections. And they talked about bringing people over to Korea to study with their groups. Would they be open to that? Just really a very collaborative approach to it. And I would say, and the other thing to add to that is, product form and product development is going to drive the success of the industry. Getting away from the basic form and going to something else that is, higher value, and doing that value added production at the source and not shipping raw material out of the state. Doing that in Alaska, I think, is going to drive the success of the industry in a very very meaningful way. So, that the more we can do in the local communities and near the farms, the more value is going to be created for the state and for the people.
So I would love to see, sort of as a follow-up, some kind of a longer term, relationship between Incheon University and University of Alaska. And maybe Sherry, you could help make that happen. I saw that you asked that question. And this exchange of students back and forth. The students were excited to think about coming to Alaska. And so it might be a way also for us to sort of build capacity on the research side, as well as, seeing some of their processing companies potentially come to Alaska and visit, and maybe do some sort of joint ventures with companies and people in Alaska.
Yeah, like literally every student we met said, maybe someday I'll see you in Alaska. And we said, well, we hope so. So yeah, I think that's you're right, Julie. Could be a very valuable exchange for sure for both of us.
Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat and no hands raised, and we are over time. So I'm going to go ahead and end this webinar. Markos, Nick, Julie, do you guys have any final comments that you want to say?
Thanks for your questions.
Go to
I
Korea.
think that last question was pretty good. See if we could all do the heart.
It's a pretty amazing place. If you can get a chance to go there, I highly suggest it. Just the people, the respect of their culture, everything. It was a valuable experience I'll never forget. So thank you.
Everybody was so welcoming and kind, and even with language barriers, I mean, it was really, really neat. And I hope that they come to Alaska and get the same thing. I see one question: do they have a seaweed degree? They have multiple seaweed phycology based degrees. I don't know what they all are, but they talked about, there's a whole, at Incheon, there's a whole set of phycology based degrees, and there were dozens of people that were in line to get those.
Well, I really appreciate your time and passing on the information. We are capturing this. We've recorded the webinar. We have copies of the slides. We're going to post a recording of the webinar on our website, alaskaseagrant.org, and we'll post those slides as well. And if anyone wants to have a direct link sent, you're welcome to email me. And if you have further questions, you can email myself. My contact is in the registration page, and I can reach out to our presenters here, or if you have their contact information, I'm sure they're happy to answer further questions. All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks. Happy birthday, Mark.
Happy birthday, Mark.
Thanks everybody. Have a great day. Have a great weekend.